There is a 40-second scene in Season 3 where Rick Sanchez, the smartest being in any universe he has ever visited, sits in a therapist's office and has absolutely nothing to say. No comeback, no portal gun, no escape. Just a man in a chair being told the truth about himself by someone he cannot outsmart. The show never fully recovered from that scene. Neither did Rick. Season 9 arrives on May 24th, 2026, carrying more unfinished business than any season before it. A villain the showrunner named directly. A character living a stolen life that is about to collapse. A boy who has been waiting 2 seasons for the story that is finally, actually his. A genius who deleted his most precious memory and got left on red for his trouble. This is everything Season 9 is, everything it is building toward, and everything the show has been quietly setting up for longer than most people realize. Welcome to Ricktopus. Let's get into it. The strike that rewrote Season 9. Before a frame was animated, there is a version of Rick and Morty Season 9 that does not exist. You will never see it. Nobody will. It lived inside a writer's room for a few months in early 2023, got maybe halfway built, and then the whole thing stopped. Not because the show was canceled, not because something went wrong creatively. It stopped because the people writing it walked out the door and refused to come back until the entire television industry agreed to treat them like human beings. That is where Season 9 actually begins. Not in a garage lab, not in a portal, in a picket line. To understand why Season 9 feels different from everything that came before it, you have to understand what happened in 2023. The Writers Guild of America, the organization that represents television and film writers across Hollywood, went on strike. This was not a small thing. It was one of the biggest work stoppages the entertainment industry had seen in 15 years. Writers from almost every major show and production put down their pens, left their rooms, and spent months outside studio gates holding signs. They wanted better pay, they wanted job security, and most importantly, for the purposes of this story, they wanted protection from artificial intelligence. Because by 2023, the studios had started talking openly about using AI tools to generate scripts, outlines, and story ideas. The thinking, from the studio's side, was simple and ugly. If a computer could write a first draft, you needed fewer writers. If a computer could generate story ideas, your writer's room could be half the size. If AI could do enough of the work, you could pay people less, or not pay them at all. Writers understood exactly what this meant for their careers, their livelihoods, and their craft, so they walked. The Rick and Morty writers walked with everyone else. Season 9 had been partially written before the strike hit. The room had built some of the foundation. Then, everything froze. For months, nothing moved. No scripts got finished, no outlines got developed, no animatics got made. The show just sat there, half-built, waiting. When the strike finally ended in late 2023, the writers came back. And what they came back to was not exactly the same job they had left. The industry had changed around them. The AI conversation had gotten louder, not quieter. Studios had made compromises, but the threat had not gone away. The writers who returned to Season 9 were the same people who had spent months fighting to prove that what they do cannot be replaced by a machine. You can feel that in how Season 9 has been talked about publicly. The official description Adult Swim released for the season reads like this: Season 9 is all certified bangers. No AI slop. Just grade A organic slop made by real humans with real human traits like back hair and cysts. That is the actual official marketing copy for a major television season. It is also, if you read it carefully, one of the most pointed things a TV show has ever said about itself. Every word of it is a response to the strike. Every word of it is the writer's room saying, "We made this, we are people, and you can tell the difference." The phrase organic slop is doing enormous work in that description. Slop is a word that usually means low quality, messy, thrown together. By calling their own show organic slop, the writers are doing something clever and a little defiant. They are saying, yes, this show is chaotic and weird and sometimes gross. That is not a bug. That is what human creativity looks like when it is actually human. A machine does not make organic slop. A machine makes something that looks polished and correct and completely empty. The distinction matters. Scott Martyr, who runs the show as its showrunner, said in a Reddit conversation with fans that Season 9 would convince everyone the show still has a full tank of gas. That is a phrase worth sitting with. A full tank of gas. Not a half tank, not a refill, not fumes, a full tank. Coming out of a strike that paused the season mid-build, that is not a small statement to make. It is the statement of a writer's room that came back from the picket line angrier, more focused, and more certain of what they wanted to make. Michael Awaleen, the president of Adult Swim, backed that up when he talked about the season publicly. He said something that sounds like standard promotional talk, but is actually a little more interesting when you read the context around it. He said the show unit is doing something scary, season over season, and that from the first frame you are going to see great high-concept insanity with some of the best character writing ever done. The word scary is the tell. Scary is not a word you use about something comfortable. It is a word you use about something that surprised even the people making it. The strike did not just delay Season 9, it changed what Season 9 is allowed to be angry about. Rick and Morty has always been a show that argues with itself. It is a show about a genius who says nothing matters, then spends every episode proving the opposite. It is a show that wraps its most genuine emotions in the loudest possible chaos, so you almost miss them. The writer's room that made Season 9 did so while carrying fresh, real, personal anger about what the industry had tried to do to them. That is not a small amount of fuel to bring to a show that runs on cynicism and barely hidden feeling. There is another layer to this that is easy to overlook. Season 9 is confirmed to be the first season produced entirely without the involvement of Bardell Entertainment, the animation studio that had built the show's visual world from the very first episode. Bardell animated all of seasons 1 through 6, and most of seasons 7 and 8. They built the way Rick's portal gun light falls. They built the timing of the burps. They built the weird, specific wobble that makes every explosion in this show feel like it came from a cartoon that exists slightly outside of normal physics, and then they were gone. Mercury Filmworks, a studio based in Ottawa, Canada, took over as the primary animation partner for Season 9. Lighthouse Studios in Ireland, which had contributed work starting in Season 7, continued their involvement. These are not small or inexperienced studios. Mercury Filmworks has years of high-quality animation work behind them, but they are not Bardell. Nobody is Bardell in the context of this show specifically. What this means for Season 9 is genuinely unknown, and that is exactly what makes it interesting to think about. The show uses a specific type of animation software, built around digital puppets that move in a way that feels handcrafted. The style has always looked slightly rough around the edges, never too clean, never too smooth. That roughness is not a mistake. It is the show's personality, living in its visuals. The question is whether a new studio, working from the same technical setup, produces something that feels identical, or whether 12 years of Bardell's specific muscle memory shows up as an absence that attentive viewers can sense without being able to name. The people who notice might not be able to explain what they are noticing. That is actually the most interesting outcome. A show you have watched for over a decade can change studios and look mostly the same, and yet something subtle has shifted. The timing of a scene is a fraction different. The way a background character moves during a joke feels slightly off. None of it is wrong, exactly. It just is not the version of the show that lives in your memory. Season 9 lands in this particularly unusual moment in the life of the show for a reason that goes beyond any single creative decision. It is the first season built completely on the other side of a crisis. The strike was a crisis. The recasting of Rick and Morty when Justin Roiland was fired was a crisis. The changing of the studio is a quieter kind of disruption, but it is a disruption nonetheless. Season 9 carries all three of those things in its production history before a single episode has aired. What is remarkable is that the people making it sound genuinely excited. Martyr did not talk about Season 9 like someone who had survived a difficult 2 years and made something they hope will be okay. He talked about it like someone who had been through a difficult 2 years and came out the other end with a better show than he expected to make. The full tank of gas line is confidence, not relief. There is a difference between those two things, and it matters. Executive producer Steve Levy confirmed in a public update that by late 2025, Season 9 was in post-production, Season 10 was in active production, and Season 11 was already being written. That is not the pipeline of a show that is struggling. That is the pipeline of a show that has found its rhythm and is moving through it. The show has also been renewed through Season 12. Nobody is making creative decisions about Season 9 while worried about whether there will be a Season 10. That freedom, small as it might seem, changes how you write. You can leave things open. You can plant seeds that will not pay off for 2 more years. You can make choices that are right for the long game, even when they are complicated in the short term. Season 9 premieres on May 24th, 2026. 10 episodes, weekly. The kind of schedule the show ran on back in its golden years, when each new episode felt like an event, and the internet spent 6 days arguing about it before the next one arrived. All of that history, all of that disruption, all of that anger and confidence and change lives in the DNA of the 10 episodes that are about to start. You will not see the strike in the story. You will not see the studio change in the credits during the episode. You will not see the AI conversation play out in any obvious way, but it is all there, underneath, shaping what got made and why it got made the way it did. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And here is the thing that makes Season 9 genuinely unlike any season before it. The show returns this time with its most dangerous loose thread still completely unresolved. A character the showrunner called in his own words, the true bona fide villain of the show. A character who has been quietly absent for 2 full seasons. A character who escaped everything Rick built and took the one tool with him that could make him unstoppable. We need to talk about Evil Morty. Section 2. Evil Morty is Season 9's villain, and the showrunner all but said so. Here is something the show has never hidden, exactly, but has never said out loud in a clean and simple way either. Evil Morty is the most dangerous character in the entire Rick and Morty universe. Not Rick Prime, not the Council of Ricks, not any alien federation or galactic government. Evil Morty, a teenager. A small, yellow-haired kid who looks almost identical to the boy we follow every episode. That is the character the show has been building toward for 9 seasons, and Season 9 is the season where that building has to start paying off in a serious way. Scott Marter said so himself. When the showrunner of Rick and Morty sits down for a public conversation with fans and says that killing Rick Prime was a creative decision that, in his own words, teed up Evil Morty as the true bona fide villain on the show, that is not a throwaway line. That is a roadmap. That is a person who runs one of the most popular animated shows on television, telling you directly where the story is going. The only question is when. And the answer, when you look at the pattern this show has been running for 9 seasons, is almost certainly now. Let's go back to the beginning of Evil Morty's story, because the beginning matters more than most people realize. Evil Morty first appeared in Season 1. The episode was called Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. On the surface, the episode was about Rick being arrested by other Ricks and accused of killing members of their community. The real story, the one hiding underneath the plot, was about a Morty who had been pushed too far. A Morty who had watched what living with a Rick does to a person and decided he was done being on the receiving end of it. He built himself up quietly, carefully, without anyone noticing, because nobody ever pays attention to the Morty. That invisibility was his greatest advantage. The reveal at the end of that episode that the villain was not an evil Rick, but a Morty using an evil Rick as a puppet landed like a gut punch. It was the first time the show made clear that the dynamic between Rick and Morty was not simply funny or adventurous or even occasionally dark. It was potentially monstrous. If a Morty could become this, what did that say about what every Rick was doing to every Morty across the multiverse? Evil Morty disappeared for 2 full seasons after that. Season 2 came and went with no sign of him. Then Season 3 arrived and dropped one of the most acclaimed episodes in the show's entire history, the Ricklantis Mix-Up. The episode did not follow Rick C-137 and Morty Prime at all. Instead, it took place entirely inside the Citadel of Ricks, the massive floating city where alternate versions of Rick and Morty had built their own society. The episode followed several different characters through different parts of that world. A student Morty trying to make something of himself, a cop Rick and cop Morty on patrol, a factory worker Morty who dared to dream. All of those storylines were building toward one thing. At the very end of the episode, in a moment the show delivered with almost no fanfare, we found out that the seemingly inspirational political candidate who had been running for president of the Citadel on a platform of change and hope was Evil Morty. He won. He executed everyone who opposed him. He took total control. The camera pulled back, the credits rolled, and the episode ended. It remains one of the most genuinely shocking things this show has ever done. Evil Morty disappeared again. Season 4 came and went. He was not there. The show kept moving, kept building other stories, kept putting Rick through different kinds of chaos. Fans started to wonder if the show had simply moved on. Then Season 5 arrived, and in its final 2 episodes, the show delivered the biggest lore event it had ever attempted. Evil Morty revealed his plan. And his plan was not about revenge in the way most villains want revenge. It was something colder and more final than that. He wanted to break out of the central finite curve. The central finite curve is one of the most important concepts in the entire show, and it requires a moment of explanation. When Rick built the technology that allows travel between dimensions, he did not build it neutrally. He built it in a way that connected only the dimensions where Rick is the smartest being in the universe. There are infinite dimensions out there, containing infinite versions of reality, but the portal gun, and the network of Ricks who use it, only moves through the slice of the multiverse where Rick always wins. Rick is always the smartest. Rick is always the most powerful. Rick built a cage for the entire multiverse and called it freedom. Evil Morty figured this out, and he decided that the only way to truly be free of Rick was not to defeat him in one dimension or destroy one version of him. It was to leave the whole system entirely. To go somewhere Rick's genius does not define the rules. To reach the infinite dimensions outside the curve where a Morty or anyone else might actually have a fair chance. He destroyed most of the Citadel to do it. He killed countless Ricks and Mortys. He used a machine partly powered by the blood of Mortys to break through through the barrier Rick had built, and then he walked through a golden portal and was gone. That golden portal is important. The portal gun Rick uses makes green portals. That is the color you have seen every single episode since the beginning, green. But Evil Morty's portal at the end of Season 5 was gold, a completely different color. Martyr confirmed in his fan conversation that portal colors do have meaning in this show. They are not random visual choices. They are signals. The gold portal is not Rick's technology. It came from Rick Prime, the version of Rick who murdered C-137's original family and whose research Evil Morty had been studying and using. A gold portal goes somewhere green portals cannot reach. Evil Morty reappeared briefly in Season 7. The episode was called Unmortricken. Rick C-137, hunting Rick Prime across dimensions, ran into Evil Morty. The two of them had to work together to take down Rick Prime, who was more dangerous than either of them could handle alone. Evil Morty helped, not out of kindness, not because he had changed. He helped because it was useful to him. He got what he needed from the encounter and then made it clear, with the specific coldness that defines him, that he wanted nothing more to do with Rick or Morty or anything inside the central finite curve. Rick Prime died in that episode. The revenge arc that had been driving Rick since the beginning of the show was finished. Rick killed the man who killed his family. And when it was over, when the biggest antagonist the show had built finally fell, Martyr and the writers stood in the aftermath of that moment and pointed directly at Evil Morty. That is your villain now. Not a Rick who went wrong, a Morty who was pushed past the point of return. Season 8 came out in 2025, and Evil Morty was not in it. That matters less than it might seem. The show has always been willing to let its biggest threads go quiet for a season or two. Evil Morty was absent from Season 2, Season 4, Season 6, and Season 8. He has appeared only in odd-numbered seasons. Season 1, Season 3, Season 5, Season 7. Every single appearance has been in an odd season. Season 9 is an odd season. That pattern is not proof of anything. Patterns in this show can be broken whenever the writers want to break them. But when you combine the odd season pattern with Martyr's direct statement calling Evil Morty the show's true villain, and then add in the confirmed news that the Season 9 writers' room said yes in capital letters when fans asked whether Evil Morty would get a story arc in the coming seasons, the math starts to feel less like coincidence and more like scheduling. What makes Evil Morty genuinely terrifying as a villain, in a way that Rick Prime never quite was, is the specific nature of what he represents. Rick Prime was essentially a worse version of Rick. He was smarter, colder, more willing to do damage, but his evil was recognizable. He was a scientist who chose cruelty over connection and kept choosing it forever. That is a comprehensible kind of monster. Rick C-137 fighting Rick Prime was, at its core, a story about a man avenging his family. Painful, personal, but emotionally legible. Evil Morty is different. Evil Morty is not a worse version of Rick. He is a better version of what Rick's relationship with Morty can create when everything goes wrong. He is what happens when the brain damage stops and the self-awareness kicks in, and the Morty realizes not only what Rick has done to him, but what Rick has done to every version of him across every dimension that Rick's technology touches. His anger is not personal, it is structural. He is not mad at one Rick, he is mad at the system Rick built. That is a much harder thing to defeat. You cannot kill a system by killing a person. Rick C-137 killed Rick Prime, and the revenge felt hollow almost immediately, which is exactly what the Season 8 finale explored. Getting what you wanted does not fix what was broken. Evil Morty already knows this. Evil Morty is already on the other side of that lesson. He left before anyone could offer him closure. He is out there, right now, in the infinite dimensions beyond the central finite curve, with a gold portal gun that can go anywhere, and with Rick Prime's research in his head, and with absolutely no reason to stay away forever. The Citadel, which Evil Morty destroyed in Season 5, has been slowly rebuilding. Season 8 showed that process continuing. A rebuilt Citadel means a rebuilt power structure. A rebuilt power structure means new Ricks consolidating control. New Ricks consolidating control means something that looks exactly like the world Evil Morty burned down the first time. If he is watching, and the show has always suggested he is paying attention to things most characters miss, that is not a situation he will let develop without a response. And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Evil Morty is not trying to destroy Rick. He made that clear in Unmortricken. He just wants to be left alone, outside the curve, free from the system. The tragedy of Season 9, if the show handles him with the same intelligence it always has, will not be a battle. It will be the moment when Rick and Morty's existence makes Evil Morty's peace impossible. When simply being themselves, being the Rick and Morty that the show follows, forces a confrontation that neither side actually wanted. That is a story about cause and consequence, about the fact that even doing nothing, even staying in your lane, can pull terrible things back toward you if the history is bad enough. Martyr also confirmed that Jessica, Squanchy, Bird Person, and Bird Daughter all have arcs coming in the near future. That list is not random. Squanchy and Bird Person are Rick's oldest friends. They are people who knew him before the show started, before everything that has happened in 9 seasons of chaos and loss. Bird Daughter is Bird Person's child with Tammy, who was a traitor working for the Galactic Federation. That child is a walking knot of complicated loyalty and identity, and the show has barely touched her yet. Jessica became something close to a time goddess after being trapped in a crystal for what felt like decades of her subjective experience. These are not characters you bring back for small moments. These are characters you bring back when the story is ready to go somewhere it has never gone before. All of that, the villain the showrunner named directly, the pattern the show has followed for 9 seasons, the threads that have been left open and are now long overdue, points towards season 9 being the moment when the quieter, colder, more personal phase of Rick and Morty's long story begins. Evil Morty is not coming back angry. He is coming back finished. He is coming back as someone who has already decided what he is going to do. The show's job in season 9 is to put Rick and Morty in the position of having to respond to a version of themselves that has gone further than either of them ever will. ___1___. But before any of that can happen, before Evil Morty or the Citadel or the gold portal gun come back into the frame, season 9 has to deal with a much quieter and in some ways much more uncomfortable problem. There is a small yellow creature who has been lying to his wife for 2 seasons now. He has a stolen portal gun, his atomic structure does not match the dimension he is living in, and his wife's scientists have just figured that out. Mr. Poopy Butthole has been running from something for a long time. Season 9 is where the running stops. Section 3. Mr. Poopy Butthole is something darker than he looks, and season 9 is where it lands. There is a joke the show has been running for years that stopped being a joke somewhere along the way without anyone quite noticing when the switch happened. Mr. Poopy except the episode he appeared in, Total Recall, was built around the idea that alien parasites had been inserting fake memories into everyone's heads, creating fictional friends and family members to hide among. The whole point of the episode was that you could not trust anyone new because the parasites could only create positive memories. If you had no bad memories of someone, they were probably fake. Beth shot Mr. Poopy Butthole. She looked at this small, smiling, yellow creature who claimed to be her friend and decided he was a parasite. She shot him. He was real. He collapsed on the floor bleeding while the family stood around processing what had just happened. Beth had shot an innocent person because she could not tell the difference between something genuine and something manufactured. That scene plays as comedy in the moment, but it is also the origin of everything that has happened to Mr. Poopy Butthole since. Because that gunshot wound did not just hurt him physically, something changed after that. The show has tracked his life across multiple seasons in the post-credits scenes of season finales, these short bonus moments after the main episode ends. And what those scenes have shown is a steady and fairly painful collapse. He lost his job. He lost his family. He went through what appeared to be a deep personal crisis. By the time season 7 arrived, he was homeless, living rough, a long way from the happy family friend who used to visit the Smiths for dinner. The man had fallen apart over the course of years of real showtime, all while the main characters kept having adventures and barely noticed. Season 7 gave him one more thing though, a portal gun. During an adventure earlier in season 7, Rick and Mr. Poopy Butthole had been involved in a situation involving Mr. Poopy Butthole's son. At some point during that chaos, Mr. Poopy Butthole quietly took one of Rick's portal guns without anyone seeing. He did not announce it. He did not make a big moment out of it. He just took it. And then, in the post-credits scene of the season 7 finale, sitting alone and homeless and with nothing left in the life he had been living, he used that stolen portal gun to do something that would define everything going forward. He found a dimension where his life had gone differently. A dimension where he was still happily married to Amy, where his family was still together, where none of the bad years had happened. He traveled to that dimension, knocked out the version of himself who lived there, disposed of that version through a portal, and took his place. He stepped into someone else's life because his own had become impossible to live in. Before he went through the portal, in that post-credits scene, he said something to the audience watching at home. He said that being fulfilled is about having a goal and doing everything you need to do to achieve it. That line landed as a joke when it aired. Looking back at it now, knowing what happened in season 8, it sounds like something much more troubling. Because what he described as fulfillment was replacing another living version of himself, erasing that person's existence, and pretending to be someone he was not. The show framed that as a punchline, but the mechanics of what he did are not funny at all. They are exactly the kind of thing the show, at its most serious, asks you to sit with. Then came season 8, specifically the post-credit scene of the season 8 finale, Hot Rick. In that scene, Mr. Poopy Butthole does what he always does in these finale tags. He talks directly to the audience. He comments on the season. He mentions that his favorite episode was the one where Jerry turned into the Easter Bunny. He is cheerful, he is comfortable, he appears to be doing well. The stolen life seems to be working, but the camera pulls back. Amy, his wife in this stolen dimension, is not sitting next to him watching the show. She is in a lab somewhere. Scientists are monitoring Mr. Poopy Butthole without his knowledge, and those scientists tell Amy something that stops the scene cold. His atomic structure does not match the structure from their dimension. His molecular makeup is wrong. He is not from this reality. He never was. Amy was right. She had suspected something was off ever since he arrived. She noticed the small things first, the way he held his fork in the wrong hand, the subtle wrongness of a person pretending to be someone they know almost everything about, but not quite everything. She took her suspicion to scientists. The scientists confirmed it. The man living in her house, sleeping in her bed, calling himself her husband, is not her husband. He is an alternate version from a different dimension who killed her actual husband and took his place. This is the situation Season 9 inherits. Now, here is where the facts end and the careful reading begins, because the show has given us specific pieces of information that point toward where this story goes next. First, there's the question of what Mr. Poopy Butthole actually is in terms of where he comes from. The scientists in that Season 8 scene did not just say he was from a different dimension. They said his atomic vibrations do not match anything in their reality. That is a very specific way of saying it. A different dimension would still be inside the central finite curve, the network of realities Rick built and connected with his portal technology. But outside the curve, in the infinite dimensions that Evil Morty escaped to, the fundamental makeup of matter and reality might work differently. The specific language the show chose, that his atomic structure matches nothing in this reality, leaves open the possibility that Mr. Poopy Butthole did not simply travel to a nearby parallel dimension. He may have originated from somewhere much further away than anyone has assumed. That is not confirmed, but the show chose those words deliberately. Rick and Morty does not do accidental. Second, there is the shape of his story across the seasons and how it mirrors the shape of Rick's story in a way that the show seems to be building toward a direct comparison. Rick is a genius who has spent his whole life running from grief, replacing real connection with chaos and adventure, and slowly, over 9 seasons, being forced to confront the fact that the running has not worked. Season 8's finale was specifically about Rick trying to let go of his dead wife Diane, and failing in complicated ways, ultimately making a choice that was part growth and part avoidance all at once. Rick's story is about a person who keeps choosing the easier wrong thing over the harder right thing, and the show is slowly, patiently making him choose differently. Mr. Poopy Butthole's story runs alongside Rick's like a dark reflection. He is also a person who has been running from grief. He also chose the easier wrong thing, repeatedly, escalating each time. He also replaced what was real with something artificial. But where Rick has the genius and the technology and the moral complexity to make his failures interesting, Mr. Poopy Butthole has none of that. He is an ordinary person who got access to extraordinary tools and used them to do something deeply wrong because the pain of his real life was too much to sit with. The question Season 9 has to answer for his character is whether the show treats him as a tragic figure or a dangerous one. Both readings are supported by what has happened. The tragic reading goes like this: Mr. Poopy Butthole was a genuine person with genuine connections who got shot by someone he trusted, watched his life fall apart in ways he did not fully deserve, and eventually broke under the weight of it. What he did was wrong, but it came from a very human kind of desperation. He wanted to stop hurting. He wanted his family back. He took a terrible shortcut to get there. The dangerous reading goes like this: Mr. Poopy Butthole is now a person who has proven he will eliminate another version of himself without hesitation to get what he wants. He has a stolen portal gun. He has been living inside a lie for at least a full season. He has no Rick watching over him, no moral check, no one who knows what he is capable of. If Amy confronts him in Season 9, the question of what he does next is not one the show can answer gently. Dan Harmon and Scott Marder were asked directly about a fan theory that Mr. Poopy Butthole was being set up as a full villain. Marder's response was that it was not their plan for the character. Harmon joked about it, but made clear that while he loved the theory, it was not where they were headed. That matters. The people running the show said the full villain arc was not the intention. But here's the thing: not being a villain and not being dangerous are two different things. A character can do genuinely terrible things, can make choices that hurt real people, and still not be positioned as the show's main antagonist. The show can make Mr. Poopy Butthole's situation devastating and morally complicated without ever putting him in a confrontation with Rick that plays out like a traditional villain storyline. His story can be a tragedy rather than a threat. What the show cannot do at this point is ignore it. The Season 8 post-credits scene raised the stakes of his situation too high for a one-line resolution. Amy knows. Scientists know. The lie has been found out. Whatever Season 9 does with that information, it will not be nothing. There is also a thread that connects his situation back to the central theme that Season 8 spent 10 episodes building. That theme was about memory, identity, and what happens when you try to erase or replace the parts of your life that hurt too much to keep. Rick built a device to delete painful memories. Beth's mind was infiltrated and rewritten. Memory Rick tried to reconstruct a version of the past that never existed, and Mr. Poopy Butthole, in his own much smaller and more personal way, did the same thing. He deleted his painful life and replaced it with a constructed version of happiness that is not real. The show has been asking the same question from multiple angles across 2 full seasons. Can you build something genuine on top of something false? Can a good thing that began with a lie ever actually be good? Rick's answer in the Season 8 finale was partial and messy and very Rick. He made a choice that was partly right and partly another layer of avoidance. Mr. Poopy Butthole's version of the same question is rawer and more personal and does not have Rick's genius to hide behind. Season 9 is the first season where the audience knows that Amy knows. Whatever conversation happens between them, whether it happens on screen or gets referenced in another in-credit scene, changes the nature of every scene Mr. Poopy Butthole is in. He is no longer just the funny fourth wall breaking creature who shows up at the end of the season to make jokes. He is a person whose entire constructed life is sitting on top of a truth that is about to surface. The show has earned the right to make that story hurt, and the evidence across 3 seasons of careful, quiet setup suggests it intends to. There is one more thing worth noting about where all of this sits in the larger shape of Season 9's story. Mr. Poopy Butthole's situation, Evil Morty's long absence, and the emotional wreckage of the Season 8 finale are all threads that point toward the same underlying question. What happens to people, or creatures, or alternate versions of people, when the choices they made to survive start collapsing under the weight of what those choices actually cost? That question has a different answer for every character carrying it into Season 9. For Evil Morty, the cost was everyone inside the curve. For Mr. Poopy Butthole, the cost was a real person who no longer exists. For Rick, the cost is still being calculated. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But none of those costs are as immediate, as raw, and as unresolved as what Rick himself is walking into Season 9 carrying. Because the Season 8 finale did not just leave open threads about villains and stolen lives. It left Rick in the most emotionally unprotected position he has ever been in. He tried to move on from the grief that has defined him for 40 years. He failed in the specific way that only Rick can fail. And then someone left him on red. That is where we go next. Section 4. The Season 8 finale left Rick more emotionally exposed than he's ever been, and Season 9 has to deal with that. There is a version of Rick Sanchez that the show has been protecting for 9 seasons. The version that does not need anyone. The version that drinks alone in the garage and builds impossible things and goes on adventures that would kill anyone else and comes home without a scratch and does it all again the next week. The version that says nothing matters with such confidence that a whole generation of fans believed him and made him into a symbol of cool detachment. Season 8 spent 10 episodes quietly dismantling that version, and the finale dismantled what was left. To understand where Rick enters Season 9, you have to understand what the Season 8 finale, the episode called Hot Rick, actually did to him. On the surface, the episode looks like another Rick adventure. There is a problem, there is chaos, there is a resolution. But underneath the plot, the episode was doing something the show had been building toward for years. It was showing Rick genuinely trying to move forward, not pretending to, not performing growth for Morty's benefit or Beth's benefit or anyone else's, actually trying, in his broken and sideways and deeply imperfect way, to let go of the thing that has been anchoring him to his worst self since before the show began. That thing is Diane. Diane is Rick's dead wife, Morty's grandmother, the woman whose murder at the hands of Rick Prime set the entire trajectory of Rick C-137's life. She died before the show started. She has existed almost entirely in memory and flashback and the absence she left behind. Rick has spent decades, inside the show's timeline, carrying that loss around like a weight he refuses to put down, because putting it down would mean accepting that she is truly gone. In Hot Rick, Rick made a decision. He removed his last remaining memory of Diane from his own mind using the memory device he had built. He did this so he could try to be emotionally available for a relationship he was developing with a character named Bug Ann, a former colleague from a group called The Defiance. Bug Ann wanted Rick to meet her family. It was not a huge ask. It was the kind of thing a normal person does when a relationship is becoming something real. For Rick, it was enormous. He removed Diane's memory. He tried to move forward. Then Then Memory Rick, a sentient version of a younger Rick that had been living inside Bird Person's mind in a previous season, found out what had happened. Memory Rick did not want Diane's memory erased. He had his own feelings about her, his own version of the attachment that Rick C-137 was trying to release. Memory Rick escaped his containment, got inside Beth's head, and used her as a tool to try to find and recover the discarded memory of Diane. He rewrote parts of Beth's thinking. He trained versions of her memories to fight for him. He pushed her toward choices that put her life in real danger. Rick had to save his daughter from a version of himself. That is not a sentence that lands softly. A version of Rick, driven by the same grief that has defined the real Rick for 40 years, nearly got Beth killed trying to hold on to something that was already gone. Rick had to look at what his own attachment to Diane had created and then choose, in real time, to prioritize his daughter's life over that attachment. He caught Beth's car in midair as she drove it toward a cliff. He talked her down. He held her. And then, because he is still Rick, he stuck her with a device that knocked her out so he could reset her memories and make sure she was okay. The tenderness and the control existed in the same moment. He said the right things and then took the choice away from her anyway. That is the most honest portrait of Rick that the show has ever drawn. He is better than he was. He is not fixed. He saved Memory Rick afterward. He did not destroy him. He built a small, contained space, a lab-grown brain, and put Memory Rick and a version of Memory Diane inside it together. He gave them a life, a small one, limited, artificial, but together. And he told the family that Memory Rick was gone. He lied to protect Memory Rick, to protect the version of his grief that he was not ready to fully let go of, even while trying to let go of it. That lie is one of the most quietly devastating things the show has done in years. Rick deleted Diane's memory from his own mind to move forward. Then, he secretly preserved a version of her in a tiny artificial world so that a version of himself could still be with her. He let go with one hand and held on with the other. He does not even seem fully aware that he did both things at the same time. Bug Ann sent him a message after everything settled, after the chaos of the finale and the emotional weight of saving Beth and the complicated choice about Memory Rick. Rick messaged her. He tried. He reached out. She left him on read. She saw the message and did not respond. That is where Rick begins season 9. He deleted his most precious memory. He saved his daughter. He kept a secret from his family. He reached out to the first person he had tried to genuinely connect with since Diane died, and she did not respond. Executive producer Steve Levy said publicly that he is excited for where the show takes Rick over the next few seasons, and specifically noted that Rick has come a very long way from who he was in the first episode. That is a real and meaningful statement coming from someone who has watched every frame of the show get made. It is also a statement that only makes sense if the journey is not finished. You say someone has come a long way when there is still somewhere further to go. Levy did not say Rick has arrived. He said Rick has traveled. The distance between where Rick started and where he could end up is exactly what season 9 has to keep navigating, and the specific position he is in at the start of season 9 makes that navigation harder and more interesting than it has ever been. Here is why. For most of the show's run, Rick's emotional armor was basically intact. Yes, it got dented. Yes, Morty broke through occasionally. Yes, the show gave us glimpses of what lived underneath the performance of not caring. But Rick always had a structural reason to keep the armor on. He had Rick Prime to hunt. He had revenge to pursue. He had a concrete enemy that gave his coldness a purpose and his detachment a function. Rick Prime is dead now. The revenge is done. The enemy that organized Rick's worst impulses into something that looked like a mission no longer exists. Rick is standing in the aftermath of getting what he wanted and discovering, as the show has always known he would discover, that it did not fix anything. It did not bring Diane back. It did not make the grief smaller. It did not answer the question of what Rick Sanchez is supposed to do when there is no one left to fight. That question is season 9's engine for Rick's story. Not a villain, not an adventure. A man who has run out of reasons to keep running and has not yet figured out what standing still looks like. The season's confirmed episode titles and the few details the showrunner has shared publicly suggest that season 9 is not going to let Rick sit quietly in that discomfort for long. There is chaos coming, because there is always chaos. But the chaos this season lands on a version of Rick who has fewer walls up than at any previous point in the show's history. He tried to feel something real. He got hurt in a quiet and ordinary way that no portal gun or genius intellect can solve. Bug Ann looked at her phone, saw his message, and chose not to answer. There is no multiverse solution to that. There is no dimension where you can undo being left on red by someone you were genuinely trying to reach. Rick can travel to 1,000 planets and build 1,000 impossible machines, and he cannot make one person respond to a message they have already seen. That specific, small, small, human kind of hurt is what Season 9 inherits for Rick. And it matters enormously because it is the first time in the show's history that Rick's emotional wound is not tied to death or tragedy or cosmic level loss. It is tied to something anyone watching can recognize. You tried, it did not work, you do not know what to do next. The show has spent 9 seasons earning the right to put Rick in that position. Season 9 is where it crashes. __quote _3 __. Before it does, there are 8 confirmed episode titles sitting in front of us like a puzzle the writers left out in the open. Each one is named after a real film or television show with a character name swapped in. Each one is hiding something about what Season 9 actually contains. And when you start reading them carefully, a picture begins to form about which characters are getting their moment, which stories are finally being told, and which one episode in the middle of the season might be doing something the show has never quite attempted before. Section 5. The 8 confirmed episode titles decoded, what the parody names actually tell us. Rick and Morty has always named its episodes like a secret handshake. The titles are almost never straightforward descriptions of what happens. They are wordplay, references, jokes layered on top of jokes. Close Rick counters of the Rick kind. Ricksy Business. The Rick Shank Rickdemption. The show takes real film and television titles and replaces words with Rick or Morty or some variation of the main characters' names, and then hides the actual content of the episode somewhere underneath that joke. Season 9 has 8 confirmed episode titles. They were released out of order, meaning nobody knows which episode is first or last or where in the season each one lands. But the titles themselves are not random. Every single one of them is a parody of something real. And when you look at what they are parodying and whose name the show chose to embed in each title, a picture starts forming about what Season 9 is actually going to be about. Start with the most straightforward one, Bud. Bud is almost certainly a reference to Jet Li, the martial arts actor, or more likely to the concept of a buddy film, a type of movie where 2 characters who are very different have to work together and drive the story through their relationship. The Jer at the front is obviously Jerry. Jerry Smith, Morty's dad, Beth's husband, Rick's son-in-law, the man the show has used as its punching bag more consistently than any other character across 9 seasons. Scott Martyr confirmed directly in his fan conversation that Jerry has some really memorable moments coming in Season 9. That is not a vague or throwaway statement. Memorable is a specific word. It means moments that stick with you after the episode is over. Moments that change how you think about a character. Jerry has had those before. The episode where he spent time on an alien planet dedicated to the people who depend on others to survive gave him genuine dignity. The Season 8 episode that gave him his own low-budget version of a Citadel story showed the show still knows how to treat him as more than a joke. Bud suggests Season 9 goes further. A buddy dynamic built around Jerry means Jerry at the center of a story, not on the edges of someone else's. Next is Mort Gully, the last Rick Forest. This one is a reference to 2 things at once. Mort Gully sounds like it is pulling from a classic piece of literature involving a man who travels to strange lands and discovers societies that mirror and satirize his own world. The last Rick Forest has the shape of a fantasy epic title, the kind where a dying world or a final refuge is at the center of the story. Put those 2 things together and you get an episode that is probably about Morty discovering some kind of world or civilization that reflects something back at him, likely something uncomfortable. The Morty name in the title, rather than Rick, suggests this is a Morty-led episode. Morty going somewhere strange alone, or mostly alone, and having to navigate it with Rick either absent or in a supporting role. Rick Days 7 Nights is a reference to a romantic film, a specific type of story where 2 people are stuck together over a period of time and the forced closeness changes something between them. The Rick at the front is obvious. 7 Nights suggests a contained time period, a specific span, a situation with a beginning and an end that the characters know is coming. This could be Rick stuck somewhere with someone for a week. It could be Rick and Morty in a situation that has a countdown built into it. The romantic film reference does not necessarily mean a love story, but it does suggest intimacy and forced proximity, and whatever comes from 2 people having nowhere to go but toward each other. Rick Fu Hustle is 2 references at once, Kung Fu and Hustle, a martial arts comedy film that mixes intense action with broad humor and genuine heart underneath the surface chaos. The Rick in front tells you whose story this is centered on. A Rick episode built on a martial arts comedy framework suggests high physical action, probably Rick fighting his way through something with more style than the situation technically requires. And the hustle element suggests a con or a scheme running underneath the fighting. This feels like a classic Rick adventure episode, the kind of contained chaos that the show does between its bigger emotional swings. Salute Your Morts is a reference to a military film, specifically one about discipline and hierarchy and the relationship between authority and the people underneath it. The Morts, plural, is interesting. Not Morty, Morts, multiple. That suggests this episode involves more than one Morty, which pulls it towards Citadel territory, or toward a situation where versions of Morty are being compared or forced to interact. The military framing on top of that suggests some kind of structure or command system that those Mortys exist inside. Given that the Citadel is rebuilding across Season 8, an episode that looks at how multiple Mortys exist within whatever new power structure is forming makes a lot of sense here. Serenity is the title that stops you cold when you first read it, because of the year in parentheses after it, Serenity, which is a reference to the word Serenity and a film of that name about a spaceship crew, but then there is a year sitting in the title. That has never happened in a Rick and Morty episode title before. A year in a title means time is part of the point. The episode is specifically set in or about or referencing a particular year. The year is 2019. That is not a random number. 2019 was the year Season 4 of Rick and Morty premiered. It was also a year that carries specific real-world significance for a generation of people, sitting right before several major global events that changed the texture of daily life. Whether the show is using 2019 as a story internal date or as a cultural reference to that specific real-world moment is genuinely unknown, but the choice to put a year in the title of an episode at all is unusual enough that it almost certainly means the episode is doing something structurally different from a normal Rick and Morty story. Martyr confirmed that Season 9 has an episode dealing with false reality in a completely different way than the show has done before. Serenity is almost certainly that episode. There's Something About Morty is a reference to a romantic comedy film about obsession and the complicated feelings people carry for someone they cannot stop thinking about. The Morty in the title puts Morty at the center. A romantic comedy framework built around Morty, at this stage of the show, points very directly at Jessica, Morty's longtime crush, the girl he has been in love with since the beginning of the show, who became something close to a time goddess after being trapped in a crystal for what felt like decades of her own experience. Martyr confirmed, in all capitals, that Jessica has an arc coming. There's Something About Morty feels like where that arc begins, or reaches its first major moment. It is also worth noting that the romantic comedy framework is built on misunderstanding and missed connection and the specific pain of wanting someone who exists in a completely different emotional space than you do. Jessica, who has experienced time in a way no other character in the show has, is in a completely different emotional space than Morty. The gap between them is now not just a high school crush gap, it is an existential one. Eraserhead is the title that generates the most questions with the fewest easy answers. Eraserhead, the film it is referencing, is one of the strangest and most deliberately unsettling films ever made. It is a black and white nightmare about a man living in an industrial wasteland who becomes a father to a deeply wronged child and cannot escape the horror of the life he is trapped in. It is surreal and disturbing and deeply uncomfortable to sit with. The Eriker in the title is not a name that maps neatly onto any established Rick and Morty character. It could be a specific alternate Rick with a name the show has not introduced yet. It could be a combination of Erickson, a surname, with Rick embedded inside it. The Eraserhead reference suggests the episode is going to be visually and tonally unlike most of what the show does. Darkness, surrealism, a particular kind of existential dread that does not get resolved cleanly. Given that Season 9 has a confirmed false reality episode, and given that Eraserhead is fundamentally about a man trapped in a reality he cannot make sense of, Eraserhead might be the darkest single episode the show has attempted in years. 8 titles, 8 different references, 8 different tones sitting in the lineup. What the titles collectively tell you is that Season 9 is not a season with one note. It is not all emotional and heavy. It is not all chaos and action. It is a season that has a Morty solo episode, and a Jerry spotlight episode, and a surrealist horror episode, and a martial arts comedy episode, and at minimum, one episode doing something genuinely new with how the show handles reality and time. That variety is exactly what the showrunners have been promising when they talk about the season having a full tank of gas. Full tank does not mean one kind of story told 10 times. It means 10 different kinds of story told with confidence. The 2 titles still unconfirmed, the 9th and 10th episode whose names have not been released, are almost certainly being held back for a reason. Finale titles in Rick and Morty tend to either reveal too much or function as misdirection. The show knows how to use a title real as a trap. Whatever those last 2 episodes are called, when their names surface, the whole shape of Season 9 will suddenly be visible in a way it is not right now. What is visible right now is enough to understand something important. Season 9 is a season where every major character in the Smith family, Rick, Morty, Jerry, and almost certainly Beth and Summer in the titles not yet confirmed, gets their own story. The season is not built around one person's arc pulling everyone else along behind it. It is built like a collection of spotlights, each one landing on a different member of the family, each one asking a different version of the same underlying question. What do you do when the life you are living stops matching the person you thought you were? But here is the thing that none of the titles, not one of them, gives you. The confirmed episode that is going to do something completely new with false reality. The one Martyr specifically called out as a real cool one. The one that deals with perception and what is real in a way the show has never tried before. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That episode is sitting somewhere in this season, and the evidence of where it is hiding and what it might actually be doing points towards something the show has been setting up for much longer than Season 9. Section 6, the false reality episode, Martyr's most cryptic Season 9 tease. Scott Martyr did not have to say anything specific about Season 9 in that fan conversation. He could have kept everything vague, the way showrunners usually do when they do not want to give anything away. Instead, he said something that has been sitting in the back of every attentive viewer's mind ever since. He said Season 9 has a real cool one that deals with false reality in a totally different, cool way than the show has done it before. That sentence is doing a lot of work. The phrase totally different is the part that matters most. Not just different, totally different. That is a person who knows exactly what they made and is confident that it does not resemble anything the show has previously attempted. For a show that has been running for over a decade and has already done dream episodes and simulation episodes and memory episodes and alternate reality episodes and episodes where the entire premise turns out to be a story being told inside another story, claiming to do false reality in a totally different way is a genuinely bold thing to say. To understand why that claim is bold, you have to look at what the show has already done with the concept of false reality, because the list is longer than most people realize. Season 1 had M. Night Shyamalan Aliens, an episode where Rick and Jerry were trapped inside a simulation run by aliens trying to extract Rick's formula for concentrated dark matter. The simulation was designed to look exactly like their real life. Rick figured it out almost immediately. Jerry did not figure it out at all. The episode played the gap between their awareness as comedy and as something slightly sadder at the same time. Season 2 had Total Recall, the episode where alien parasites implanted fake memories to disguise themselves as real people. The entire premise of that episode was that you could not trust your own recollection of whether someone was real. Your memory of loving someone was not proof that the love was genuine or that the person existed. Season 3 had a version of this through the memory machine that Rick used to escape from Galactic Federation prison in the premiere, constructing fake versions of his own thoughts to mislead his captors, while the real plan ran underneath. Season 4 had Never Ricking Morty, an episode that took place inside a story engine on a train, a premise so layered in fictional frames that the episode itself started questioning its own right to exist as a story. Season 7 had Fear No Mort, the episode Martyr specifically referenced when he said Season 9 would do false reality in a totally different way. Fear No Mort took Rick and Morty into a fear dimension that generated personalized nightmare scenarios pulled from each person's deepest psychological wounds. Rick's aversion so appealing that the danger was not the nightmare. The danger was that the good dream was a trap. Rick nearly stayed inside it. The episode was about how the most effective false reality is not a terrifying one. It is a comforting one. It is the version of life you most wish had been true. Martyr said Season 9 does it in a totally different way than that. So what is left? What has the show not done yet when it comes to false reality? The memory erasure device from Season 8 is the most immediate and obvious answer. Rick built a tool that does not just suppress memories, it removes them permanently. It physically extracts the emotional content of a memory and discards it. Beth and Space Beth both used the device on themselves during Season 8. Rick used it on himself to remove his memory of Diane. The device was not fully explored in terms of what it can do at its edges. What happens to a person whose memories have been erased, but who still carries the emotional shape of what was removed? What happens if you wipe the specific memory, but the grief stays anyway? Like a room where the furniture has been taken out, but the marks on the floor still show where everything used to sit. An episode built around that device, around the experience of living inside a version of reality that has been surgically altered by the removal of specific memories would be doing something the show has not done before. Previous false reality episodes were about external deception. Something or someone outside the characters was constructing the unreality. The memory device makes the false reality internal. It is not a simulation someone else built. It is the character's own mind, restructured by their own choice, now presenting a version of existence that feels real because they genuinely cannot remember what was taken away. That is a scarier premise than a fear dimension or an alien simulation. Because in those cases, even when the character does not know they are in a false reality, the audience knows. The show lets you in on the trick. The horror of the memory device version is that neither the character nor the audience might know which parts have been removed. You could be watching an episode and not realize until the very end that the entire emotional landscape of what you were watching was shaped by an absence you could not see. Then there is the Serenity title, and the year 2019 sitting inside it. The film that Serenity references is about a crew on a spaceship who discover a dark secret about the government that controls their world. The secret involves a substance that was released into a planet's atmosphere to make the population calmer and more docile. The experiment worked too well. The people became so calm they stopped doing anything at all. They lay down and died without resistance. The substance also had a different effect on a small percentage of the population, driving them into a violent frenzy instead. The crew of the ship has to decide what to do with the truth they have found, and whether exposing it is worth the cost. A Rick and Morty episode using that framework, with the year 2019 embedded in the title, could be doing something with the Galactic Federation, which has historically been the show's version of a governmental authority that controls populations through subtle and not-so-subtle means. The Federation had Rick in prison in Season 3. The Federation has tentacles throughout the multiverse. An episode about a Federation experiment that went wrong in 2019, specifically that the crew of Rick's ship discovers and has to decide what to do with, would fit the Serenity framework almost perfectly. The year 2019 as an in-story date also creates a timeline question worth thinking about. The show is set roughly in the present, which means 2019 exists within living memory for the characters. Something that happened in 2019 in the show's universe is not ancient history. It is recent enough that people who were affected by it are still alive, still living with the consequences, still potentially unaware of what actually happened to them. That is a false reality that is not constructed from the outside by a villain or from the inside by a device. It is a false reality that history created and that the characters have simply been living inside without knowing it. The revelation that your present is built on top of something that was done to your past without your knowledge is its own kind of horror. It does not require a simulation or a fear dimension. It just requires the truth finally surfacing. Martyr also confirmed, in that same fan conversation, that portal colors have meaning. He said it plainly and then did not elaborate. That is exactly the kind of statement a showrunner makes when they want attentive viewers to start paying attention to something they might have been treating as background detail. The portal gun Rick uses has primarily made green portals. That is the default color, the standard, the one that has appeared in nearly every episode since the beginning. But the show has featured other colors at specific moments. Evil Morty's escape in Season 5 produced a gold portal, the one made possible by Rick Prime's research and capable of reaching beyond the central finite curve. The confirmation that portal colors carry meaning suggests that every time the show has used a color other than green, it was saying something the audience was supposed to clock and carry forward. If Season 9 introduces a new portal color, or shows an existing alternate color being used by a character in a new context, that color is narrative information. It tells you where that portal goes in terms of the multiverse's geography. Green means inside the curve, gold means outside it. What other colors exist and what they access is now confirmed to be a genuine question with a genuine answer that the show intends to provide eventually. This matters for the false reality episode because the nature of the false reality, whether it is internal or external, whether it was constructed by a person or a government or a device or simply by time, might be readable through what color portal gets someone in or out of it. If a character enters a false reality through a gold portal, they are somewhere outside the central finite curve, somewhere Rick's standard tools and understanding of the multiverse might not apply. That is a different kind of trapped than being inside a simulation Rick built, because Rick cannot simply reverse engineer his way out of a system his own genius did not design. Season 7's Fear No Mort was specifically about Rick being trapped in a false reality that worked by exploiting his emotional vulnerabilities rather than his intellectual ones. The totally different approach Martyr promised for Season 9 might be the inverse of that. Not a false reality that bypasses Rick's intelligence to get at his feelings, but a false reality that bypasses his feelings to get at something deeper, something he does not not have a word for because he has spent his entire life making sure he never had to develop one. All of these threads, the memory device, the year in the title, the portal colors, the confirmed false reality episode that the showrunner is specifically proud of, are pointing toward a single episode of Season 9 that is going to ask a question the show has been circling for years. What does it mean to know that the reality you are living in was built on something that was taken from you without your knowledge or consent? And what do you do when you realize that fighting your way back to the truth might cost more than staying comfortable in the version of reality you have been given? That question does not have a clean answer. The show knows that. The best Rick and Morty episodes never pretend otherwise. But before Season 9 can get to its most ambitious creative swings, it has to deal with something much more practical. The people who animate those swings have changed. The studio that built the visual language of this show for over a decade is no longer in the room. And the question of what that actually looks like on screen, whether anyone can tell, whether it matters, whether 12 years of accumulated visual muscle memory can be transferred to a new team without losing anything essential, is one that nobody has answered yet because Season 9 has not aired. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That answer is coming on May 24th, and it might be the most quietly significant thing about the entire season. Section 7. The Bartle Split. What happens when the studio that built the show's look leaves? Most people who watch Rick and Morty have never heard of Bartle Entertainment. That is not a criticism. It is just how television works. The audience watches the show. The audience does not watch the studio. The name that appears in the opening credits is Adult Swim. The names people know are Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland, and now Scott Martyr. The animation studio that actually builds every frame, that turns the scripts into moving images, that makes Rick's face do the specific thing it does when he is pretending not to care about something he very obviously cares about. That studio lives in the background, invisible, essential. Bartle Entertainment was that studio for 12 years. They animated every single episode of seasons 1 through 6, all 60 of them. They were also responsible for the majority of the animation work in seasons 7 and 8, handling 11 episodes across those two seasons, while a studio called Lighthouse Studios, based in Ireland, contributed work to the rest. From the very first episode of Rick and Morty, the one where Rick takes Morty to an alien planet to retrieve seeds, and everything goes wrong in the specific way that defined the show's entire personality, through the season 8 finale where Rick caught Beth's car in midair and held his daughter and said the right things for once. Bartle was building those images. Season 9 is the first season they had no part in at all. Mercury Filmworks, a studio based in Ottawa, Canada, takes over as the primary animation partner starting with Season 9. Lighthouse Studios continues their involvement. These are the studios that will be responsible for every image you see when Season 9 premieres on May 24th. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what animation studios actually do on a show like Rick and Morty, and why 12 years of working on the same show creates something that cannot be fully written down in a set of instructions. Rick and Morty uses a specific type of animation built around digital puppets. The characters are constructed as a set of parts: arms, legs, heads, facial features that can be moved and repositioned to create the illusion of motion. The software used is called Toon Boom Harmony, a standard tool in the animation industry. The backgrounds are built in Adobe Photoshop. The finishing work is done in Adobe After Effects. All of that is documented. All of that can be handed over from one studio to another in a folder of files. What cannot be handed over in a folder is feel. Every animation studio has a specific way of working that develops over time. The animators who worked on Rick and Morty at Bartle for 12 years learned, through hundreds of episodes, exactly how much Rick's shoulder moves when he shrugs. They learned the precise timing of the pause before a punchline lands. They learned how Morty's eyes go wide in a way that reads as fear versus the slightly different way they go wide when he is surprised versus the third variation that reads as the specific mix of fear and excitement that is uniquely Morty's response to being dragged into something he did not ask for. They learned Summer's posture when she is trying to look unbothered. They learned Jerry's walk, which has to communicate defeat and small dignity simultaneously, or the character stops working. None of that knowledge lives in a document. It lives in the hands and eyes of the people who built it across 12 years of practice. Mercury Filmworks is a respected studio with genuine experience making high-quality animation. They are not learning from scratch. They have access to all of Bartle's files, all of the character models, all of the documented specifications for how the show is supposed to look. And starting in Season 7, Lighthouse Studios was already contributing work to the show, meaning there is at least one studio with some recent first-hand experience of what Rick and Morty requires. The transition is not going in blind, but experience with other shows does not automatically transfer to the specific requirements of this this one. Every animated series has its own rules. Rick and Morty's rules are subtle in a way that makes them particularly hard to replicate without direct practice. The show looks slightly rough on purpose. It is not polished in the way that a lot of modern animation is polished. The lines are a little loose. The character designs have an almost handmade quality to them, even though they are built digitally. That looseness is not sloppiness. It is a carefully maintained aesthetic choice that requires constant, active decision-making to preserve. The temptation when you are a technically skilled studio is to clean things up, to make edges crisper and movement smoother, because clean and smooth are usually the goals in animation. On Rick and Morty, clean and smooth would be wrong. There is also the question of comedic timing, which is where animation and writing meet in a way that is almost impossible to fully separate. A joke in Rick and Morty does not just exist in the script. It exists in the precise moment the animator chooses to cut to a reaction, the specific number of frames that pass between the line being delivered and the character's face changing, the way a background character moves during a moment that is supposed to be about something else entirely. Bardell learned the show's comedy rhythms over 12 years. They knew when to hold a beat and when to rush past it. They knew which jokes needed the animation to underplay and which ones needed the animation to push harder than the writing. That knowledge is what Mercury Filmworks does not have yet, at least not for this show specifically. They will develop it. Every studio does, given time and enough episodes to work through. But Season 9 is their first season. It is the season where that learning happens in real time, and where the gap between what they know and what Bardell knew might occasionally be visible in ways that attentive viewers feel without being able to name. The most likely place to notice the difference, if there is one, is not in the big moments. The big moments, the dramatic scenes, the action sequences, the emotionally significant conversations between Rick and his family, those get the most attention and the most care from any studio working on the show. The places where accumulated institutional knowledge shows up most clearly are the small moments, the way a minor character sits down in the background of a scene, the specific timing of a blink, the way Rick reaches for his flask when he is listening to someone talk and does not want to show that he is actually listening. These micro details accumulate across a season into something that either feels right or feels like a very good imitation of a thing that feels right. Whether Season 9 lands on the right side of that line is genuinely unknown because Season 9 has not aired yet. The first look images that Adult Swim released show character designs that look consistent with the show's established visual style. The colors are right. The proportions are right. From a still image perspective, nothing looks wrong, but still images cannot capture timing. Still images cannot capture rhythm. Those are things you only know when you watch. There is a version of this transition that is completely seamless. Mercury Filmworks studied the show carefully, worked closely with the production team, matched Bardell's approach as closely as possible, and Season 9 looks and feels identical to every season that came before it. Most viewers would never know the studio changed. The show just continues. There is another version where something is slightly different. Not wrong exactly, not bad, just different in the way that anything is different when the hands that built it change. The show still works, the stories are still good, but there is a quality that long-term viewers felt in Bardell's work that does not quite survive the transition. And the show that comes out the other side is recognizably Rick and Morty, while also being a slightly different version of Rick and Morty than the one that existed for the first 8 seasons. Both of those versions are plausible. Neither can be confirmed until May 24th. What can be said with confidence is that the production team made this change deliberately and knowingly. Scott Martyr and the people running the show are not unaware of what Bardell contributed to Rick and Morty. They worked alongside that studio for years. The decision to move to Mercury Filmworks was not made carelessly. Studios do not change primary animation partners on major shows without significant planning and consideration. The choice was made, the transition was managed, and the people making Season 9 believe the result is one of the best seasons the show has ever produced. Martyr rated Season 9 as a 1 olive season in the Harmontown rating system that the show's inner circle uses, where 1 olive is the best possible rating. Steve Levy agreed, rating it at the very top of the scale as well. Those ratings come from people who have seen the finished episodes, people who know what they gave up by losing Bardell and what they gained by working with Mercury Filmworks. If the animation transition had compromised the season in any significant way, it is hard to imagine those ratings being as high as they are. The more interesting long-term question is what happens beyond Season 9. Mercury Filmworks will gain experience with the show the same way Bardell did. Episode by episode, season by season, they will develop the specific muscle memory that makes the difference between animating Rick and Morty and understanding Rick and Morty. By Season 10 and Season 11, which are already in production and writing respectively, Mercury Filmworks will have logged enough time on the show to have built their own version of the institutional knowledge Bardell carried. carried. The show will become theirs the way it became Bardell's. Season 9 is the transition point. The first chapter of Rick and Morty's visual life without the studio that defined it from the beginning. That is not a small thing to carry into a season that is already carrying the weight of a strike, a recasting, and some of the most ambitious story threads the show has ever attempted. Quote _ 6 __. But whatever Mercury Filmworks has done with Season 9, whatever the visual experience of watching it turns out to feel like, it lands on an audience that has been watching this show long enough to have a relationship with it that goes beyond any single studio's contribution. Fans of Rick and Morty do not watch for the animation studio. They watch for Rick and Morty. And for Morty specifically, Season 9 is the first season in several years where the show finally seems ready to give him back the spotlight he has been waiting for. Section 8. Morty has been sidelined for 2 seasons. Season 9 is his reckoning. There is a version of Morty Smith that the show introduced in the very first episode and has been slowly, quietly replacing ever since. The original Morty was simple. He was nervous, he was easily scared, he was in love with a girl at school who barely knew he existed, and he had no idea what the universe actually looked like. He was a blank page. Rick wrote on him constantly. Adventures happened to Morty. Morty reacted. That was the arrangement. 9 seasons later, Morty Prime, the specific Morty that the show has been following since Season 6 after the continuity reshuffle that came before it, is not that person anymore. He has seen things that would break most adults. He has made choices that cost real lives. He has been to the edges of the multiverse and back. He fathered a child on an alien planet when he was barely a teenager. He watched Rick do things that no child should watch anyone do, and came out the other side still choosing to go back through the portal. That is not a blank page. That is a person with a history. The problem is that Seasons 7 and 8 largely forgot to use that history as the center of a story. Season 7 was built around resolving the Rick Prime storyline. That was Rick's arc, Rick's mission, Rick's emotional closure. Morty was present, Morty helped, Morty mattered in the smaller stories inside individual episodes. But the engine of Season 7 was Rick, and Morty existed in relation to that engine, rather than having one of his own. Season 8 went further in the other direction. The emotional center of Season 8 was Beth. The finale, Hot Rick, was almost entirely about Rick and Beth and Space Beth and Memory Rick and Diane. Morty played no meaningful role in the finale at all. One of the show's 2 lead characters, the one whose name is literally in the title, sat Season 8's most important episode out. That is a debt the show owes him. Season 9 is where it pays up. The evidence for this starts with the confirmed episode title, There's Something About Morty. The film that title references is a romantic comedy built entirely around one person's obsessive, complicated, years-long feelings for someone they cannot stop thinking about. Put Morty's name in that title, and the film it is pointing toward becomes obvious almost immediately. Jessica. Jessica has been in Morty's life since the first season. She was the girl in his class, the one he built a love potion for in Season 1, the one whose presence in his life caused one of the most catastrophic single-episode chain reactions the show ever produced. He has had feelings for her across the entire run of the show, through every dimension they have visited, and every catastrophe they have survived, and every version of himself he has been forced to become. Jessica has been a constant. Then, Season 5 happened to her. In the Season 5 premiere, during an adventure that went wrong in the specific way Rick and Morty adventures go wrong, Jessica got trapped inside a time crystal. Time inside the crystal moved at a completely different rate than time outside it. From everyone else's perspective, she was trapped for a short period. From her perspective, she was inside that crystal for what felt like decades. She experienced an entire long stretch of life, alone, in an altered state of time, while the world outside kept moving at its normal pace. When she came out, she was different. She described herself as having become one with time and space. She said she needed to continue her journey. She called herself, in her own words, a time god, and then she left. She walked out of Morty's life, and the show did not bring her back in any significant way for several seasons afterward. The gap between who Jessica was when she went into that crystal and who she was when she came out is one of the most underexplored pieces of story the show has left sitting on the table. She was a teenager who went in, she came out as something that had lived a subjective lifetime of experience and developed an understanding of time that no other character in the show possesses. The Morty who loved her was in love with a person who no longer quite exists in the same form. And the Jessica who came back is someone who lived through something so far outside ordinary human experience that the question of whether she can relate to Morty at all is a genuine and serious one. Scott Marder confirmed, in all capitals, that Jessica has an arc coming. There's something about Morty almost certainly delivers or begins that arc. The romantic comedy framework the title references is built on misunderstanding and emotional emotional distance, and the specific pain of two people who want each other but are separated by something that cannot be easily fixed. The emotional distance between Morty and Time Jessica is not a misunderstanding. It is real. She has experienced time in a way he never will. He has feelings that developed when she was a different person than the one she is now. Whether the show plays that gap as funny or heartbreaking or both at the same time is exactly the kind of question Rick and Morty at its best refuses to answer simply. Martyr also confirmed that Evil Morty has an arc coming in the near future. That confirmation, combined with the title Mort Gully, The Last Rick Forest, suggesting a Morty-led solo adventure, builds a picture of Season 9 as the season where Morty stops being the person things happen to and starts being the person whose choices drive what happens. The specific shape of what a Morty-centered arc looks like in Season 9 is not confirmed beyond the titles and the showrunner's broad statements. But the show has been building toward a particular question for several seasons now, and it is one that Season 9 seems structurally positioned to start answering. The question is this: what does Morty want, specifically, when Rick is not involved in the wanting? For most of the show's run, Morty's wants have been reactive. He wants Rick to stop doing the dangerous thing. He wants to survive the adventure. He wants to get home. He wants Jessica to notice him. He wants his family to be okay. These are all reasonable human wants, but they are all defined in relation to something or someone else. They are wants that exist because of circumstances, rather than wants that come from somewhere deep inside Morty's own sense of who he is and what he is trying to build. The Morty that Season 9 inherits has been through enough to have developed wants that are genuinely his own. He attempted to reconnect with his Gazorpian son, Morty Jr., in Season 8. That storyline, a callback to a Season 2 episode where Morty fathered a child on an alien planet with a sex robot, and that child grew to adulthood within days, showed a Morty trying to take responsibility for something he had left behind. It did not go perfectly. These things rarely do on this show. But the attempt itself was significant. Morty was not just reacting to something Rick put in front of him. He was going back to something he had avoided, by choice, because he felt the pull of an obligation he had been ignoring. That Morty is not the same as the one who showed up in Season 1, terrified on an alien planet, holding alien seeds in his body cavities. He is someone who has started to develop a moral compass that operates independently of Rick's influence. Not completely independently. The show is honest about how much Rick has shaped who Morty is, both the good and the bad parts of that shaping. But enough independently that Season 9, with its confirmed Morty-focused episodes, has genuine material to work with that does not require Rick to be the organizing principle. The most interesting version of a Season 9 Morty arc is the one where Morty's growth puts him in direct conflict with what Rick needs from him. Not the kind of conflict they have had before, where Morty protests and Rick ignores him and the adventure happens anyway. A deeper conflict. One where Morty has developed enough of his own identity that continuing to be Rick's sidekick requires him to actively choose that role rather than just defaulting into it. The moment a sidekick realizes they are choosing to be a sidekick is the moment the entire dynamic of the relationship has to be renegotiated. Evil Morty, when he returns, is the sharpest possible version of this theme. Evil Morty is what happens when a Morty decides he is done choosing to be a sidekick. He is not a villain in the traditional sense of someone who wants power for its own sake. He is someone who looked at the Rick and Morty dynamic with clear eyes and decided it was a trap, and then spent years building a way out of it. The confrontation between Morty Prime and Evil Morty, whenever the show stages it, will not just be action or plot. It will be Morty Prime having to look at a version of himself that made the opposite choice and decide whether that choice was wrong or whether it was just a choice he has not made yet. That is not a comfortable story. The show knows that. The best Rick and Morty episodes are the ones that make you sit with something uncomfortable long after the credits roll. Season 9 has more than enough material to give Morty the season he has been owed for 2 years. The confirmed titles, the showrunner's statements, the threads left open by Season 8, and the long-standing question of who Morty is becoming, all of it points toward a season where the boy who used to hold alien seeds in his stomach and scream his way through adventures starts making choices that are genuinely, recognizably his own. Whether those choices make Rick proud or make Rick afraid is the question that Season 9 seems most interested in asking. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And just as Morty is finally stepping into his own spotlight, the show is simultaneously expanding the universe that spotlight exists inside. Because Season 9 does not arrive alone. It arrives alongside something the franchise has never had before, a full spin-off series. A separate show built around one of the most beloved recurring characters in the Rick and Morty universe. And the existence of that spin-off changes what Season 9 itself is free to do in ways that are are easy to miss if you are not paying attention to the shape of the whole thing. Section 9. The President Curtis spinoff and what it means for Season 9's universe. There is a character in Rick and Morty who has been quietly becoming one of the most interesting people in the entire show without ever being the main focus of it. President Andre Curtis has appeared across multiple seasons, voiced by Keith David, and every single time he shows up, the show treats him as something the other characters in most animated shows never get to be. He is competent. He is funny without being a joke. He is a world leader who actually leads, who pushes back against Rick, who negotiates rather than just reacting, who has his own agenda that exists completely independently of whatever Rick and Morty are doing that week. He is also, as of the summer of 2025, getting his own show. President Curtis was announced at San Diego Comic-Con on July 25, 2025. Dan Harmon created it alongside a writer named James Siciliano. Keith David, the actor who has voiced President Curtis across all of his appearances in Rick and Morty, will return to play the character as the lead. The show is set in the same universe as Rick and Morty and follows President Curtis dealing with threats and situations that Rick cannot be bothered to handle, or chooses not to, approached from the president's point of view rather than Rick's. The announcement came with a joint statement from Harmon and Siciliano that described President Curtis as the only person in the multiverse who can go toe-to-toe with Rick and still hold office. That description is not just promotional language. It is a genuine and accurate summary of what makes the character work. Every other character in Rick and Morty who goes up against Rick either loses badly, gets used as a tool, or eventually gets absorbed into Rick's orbit in some way. President Curtis does none of those things. He holds his ground. He wins sometimes. He loses sometimes. He keeps showing up. That is a different relationship with Rick than almost anyone else in the show has. The spinoff is slated for release in 2026, the same year as Season 9 of Rick and Morty. Both shows landing in the same calendar year makes 2026 the biggest year the Rick and Morty franchise has ever had in terms of new content. Two separate shows, built in the same universe, running in overlapping time frames, produced by the same creative leadership. To understand why this matters for Season 9 specifically, you have to think about what a spinoff does to the show it spins off from. When a recurring character gets their own series, the main show is released from a specific obligation. That character no longer needs to be fully serviced inside the parent show's episodes. Their development, their stories, their emotional journey can happen in their own space. The parent show can reference them, can cross paths with them, can use them in smaller ways without needing to give them a full episode's worth of attention every time they appear. Before President Curtis had his own show, every appearance he made in Rick and Morty had to do double duty. It had to tell a story that worked inside the episode while also maintaining and developing a character who was popular enough that the audience wanted more of him. That is a real constraint on a show that has 10 episodes per season and dozens of ongoing threads competing for those 10 slots. With President Curtis getting his own series, that constraint lifts. Season 9 does not need to give the president a spotlight episode to satisfy the audience's appetite for him. If he appears in Season 9, his appearance can be exactly as large or small as the story requires, without the writers feeling any pressure to use the moment to develop him further. His development is happening elsewhere, in his own show, where it has room to breathe. This is one of the quiet structural gifts the spin-off gives to Season 9. It frees up space. Space inside a 10-episode season of Rick and Morty is precious. Every episode slot is a choice. Giving an episode to President Curtis is taking that slot away from Evil Morty, or Jessica, or Bird Person, or the memory erasure fallout from Season 8, or any of the other threads that have been building for multiple seasons. The existence of a President Curtis spin-off means the writers can trust that his story is being told, even if Season 9 does not tell it. That trust creates room for the stories only Season 9 can tell. The spin-off is also the third attempt the franchise has made at expanding the Rick and Morty universe beyond the main show. The first was a web series called Vindicators 2, which followed the superhero characters introduced in a Season 3 episode. The second was Rick and Morty the Anime, a full animated series produced in Japan that told stories in the Rick and Morty universe with a completely different visual style and storytelling approach. President Curtis is the third, and it is by far the most ambitious. A full Adult Swim series, built by the main show's creator, centered on an established character voiced by the same actor who has always played him. The fact that Harmon is directly involved in creating President Curtis is significant. He is not handing the character off to another team and stepping away. He is building the spin-off himself, alongside Siciliano, while simultaneously serving as executive producer on Seasons 9, 10, and 11 of the main show. That level of involvement from the same creative mind means the two shows will share a consistent understanding of the universe they exist in. The President Curtis that appears in his own show will be the same President Curtis that appears in Rick and Morty, because the same person who created him is running both. That consistency matters for canon, which is the word for what is officially true in the show's universe. Rick and Morty has always been careful, in its own chaotic way, about what it treats as real and permanent versus what it treats as throwaway and reversible. The things that happen in President Curtis will be real in the same universe where Season 9 takes place. Events from one show could theoretically affect the other. Characters could cross over. Something that begins in President Curtis could land in Rick and Morty, or something from Season 9 could send ripples into the spin-off. Whether that kind of direct connection between the two shows actually happens in their first overlapping year is unknown, but the infrastructure for it exists in a way it never has before. The Rick and Morty franchise has never had two shows running simultaneously in the same universe with the same creative leadership until now. Whatever that enables, the audience will see it for the first time in 2026. Keith David, in a public update he gave about the spin-off earlier in 2026, confirmed that President Curtis would be releasing later in the year. He also indicated that the show picks up from where the character was last left in Rick and Morty, meaning it is not a reboot or a reimagining. It is a continuation. The President Curtis who stars in his own show has lived through everything that happened to him across his appearances in the main series. He carries that history with him. That continuity has a specific implication for Season 9. If President Curtis's spin-off picks up from where his story left off in Rick and Morty, then Season 9 either takes place before the spin-off begins, running a parallel timeline, or it takes place afterward, in which case anything that happens to the President in his own show could be something Season 9 references or responds to. The sequencing of these two shows, which one lands first and how they relate to each other chronologically, will shape how the audience moves between them. Adult Swim is reportedly considering scheduling the two shows back-to-back within 2026, which would give fans of the franchise multiple months of consecutive new content in the same universe. If that scheduling happens, the experience of watching both shows in sequence would be unlike anything the franchise has offered before. You would be watching two separate but connected corners of the same multiverse unfold in real time, alternating between the perspective of a genius scientist who thinks he is above everything and the perspective of a world leader who has to actually govern the world that scientist keeps disrupting. That contrast is the most interesting thing the franchise is doing in 2026. Rick sees the universe as a place to pass through, to use, to occasionally save when it suits him, but fundamentally a backdrop for his own story. President Curtis sees the universe as a place he is responsible for. He has to answer for things. He has to make decisions whose consequences land on real people. He cannot portal away when something goes wrong. He has to stay and deal with it. Putting those two perspectives in dialogue with each other, even across two separate shows, is the kind of creative move that suggests the people running the Rick and Morty franchise are thinking about it as something bigger than a single show. They are building a universe that can hold multiple viewpoints simultaneously, the way the actual universe does, where the same events look completely different depending on where you are standing when they happen. For Season 9 of Rick and Morty specifically, the spin-off's existence is a quiet permission slip. Permission to go deeper on the stories that only the main show can tell. Permission to leave President Curtis to his own series and spend those freed-up episode slots on Evil Morty and Jessica and the Memory Device, and Morty's long overdue moment in the center of his own story. The franchise is expanding, which means the main show gets to contract, to go narrower and deeper rather than wider and broader. Narrower and deeper is exactly what the most important remaining question of Season 9 requires. Because the most significant thing the season has to reckon with is not a villain or a spin-off or an animation studio change or even a false reality episode. It is the three people standing at the center of the show since the very beginning, carrying their history with each other into a season that is, by every indication, willing to be honest about what that history has cost all of them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Ian Cardoni and Harry Belden walk into Season 9 as something they have never been before. Not replacements, not new voices finding their footing. They are Rick and Morty now, fully and completely, in a way that took 3 seasons to become true. And what that means for the show, for the characters, and for every story Season 9 wants to tell is something nobody in the audience has fully processed yet. Section 10. Ian Cardoni and Harry Belden enter their first season with nothing left to prove. There is a moment in the life of every replacement where the replacement stops being a replacement. It does not happen on a specific date. It does not happen because someone announces it. It happens gradually, across enough time and enough work, until the day comes when you realize you stopped thinking about the person who used to do the job and started just thinking about the job itself. The replacement became the thing. The new voice became the voice. The transition that everyone everyone was nervous about became the new normal, and the normal before, it started to feel further away than it actually is. That moment arrived for Ian Cardone and Harry Belden sometime during Season 8. Season 10 will confirm it completely. But Season 9 is the season where it fully matters, because Season 9 is the first season where the creative team can write for these two actors without any part of their thinking being shaped by who came before them. To understand what that means, you have to go back to where this transition started. Justin Roiland created Rick and Morty alongside Dan Harmon. He voiced both Rick and Morty from the very first episode through the end of Season 6. His voice was the voice. Not just in the sense that he was the actor doing the job, but in the deeper sense that the characters were built around what his voice could do. The specific way Rick's burp interrupts his own sentences. The specific register of Morty's panic. The way it sits right at the edge of crying without quite falling over. Those were Roiland sounds, developed across 6 seasons of performance, and they became inseparable from the characters in the audience's mind. In January 2023, Adult Swim ended their relationship with Roiland following serious allegations made against him. He was removed from the show entirely. The characters he had voiced for 6 seasons needed new voices immediately because Season 7 was already in production. Ian Cardone took over as Rick. Harry Belden took over as Morty. Season 7 arrived in October 2023 with almost no advance warning about how the recasting would sound. Adult Swim did not release extensive previews of the new voices. They did not run a promotional campaign around the transition. They essentially said, here is the new season, and let the audience decide for themselves. It was a bold and slightly nerve-wracking approach. And the reason it worked is that Cardone and Belden both understood something important about their assignment. They were not being asked to do impressions of Roiland. They were being asked to play Rick and Morty. Those are related but different things. An impression tries to copy the surface of a performance, the specific sounds and rhythms and mannerisms of a particular person doing a particular job. Playing a character means going underneath the surface, finding what the character actually is emotionally and intellectually, and then expressing that through your own voice rather than through a copy of someone else's. Cardone found Rick almost immediately. The burp stayed. The cadence of Rick's speeches, the way he speeds up when he is excited about an idea and slows down when he is trying to manipulate someone, the specific tone he uses when he is pretending something does not hurt him, all of it was present from the first episode of Season 7. It was not identical to Roiland's Rick. It was not supposed to be. It was Cardone's Rick, which is to say, it was Rick approached fresh by someone who understood the character deeply enough to find his own way into it. Belden's Morty was slightly different in the sense that Morty's voice requires a specific quality of vulnerability that is easy to perform and very hard to make feel real. Morty's fear and his heart have to coexist in the same sound. He has to sound genuinely scared without sounding weak, genuinely caring without sounding naive, genuinely growing without losing the essential Mortiness that makes the audience root for him. Belden found that balance. Not perfectly on the first try, because nobody does anything perfectly on the first try, but close enough in Season 7 that the audience accepted it, and better in Season 8 to the point where the acceptance had turned into something closer to affection. The critical response to the recasting largely agreed with this. Season 7 earned strong reviews. Season 8 earned a 93% rating from critics, with reviewers specifically noting that the show was delivering clever and consistently hilarious work. Neither of those results happens if the new voices are a distraction. Neither of those results happens if the audience is spending their viewing time thinking about who used to be in those roles instead of engaging with the stories being told. By the time Season 8 ended in July 2025, Cardone and Belden had logged 20 episodes as Rick and Morty. 20 episodes is more than some shows produce in their entire runs. It is more than enough time to establish ownership of a character. It is more than enough time for the writers to have adjusted their approach to suit what these specific actors bring to the roles. That last point is the one that matters most for Season 9. Writing for a voice actor is not an abstract exercise. You write for the specific instrument that specific person plays. The rhythms of their speech, the particular sounds they make when a character is thinking versus when they are reacting versus when they are delivering a prepared speech they have practiced versus when they are saying something they did not plan to say. Good voice writing is shaped by intimate knowledge of the actor's capabilities and tendencies. 6 seasons of scripts were shaped by knowledge of Roiland's instrument. Seasons 7 and 8 were a period of adjustment, of writers learning what Cardone and Belden could do and beginning to write toward those capabilities rather than away from them. Season 9 is the first season where that adjustment period is fully behind them. The writers have now worked with Cardone and Belden long enough to know their instruments completely. They know what Cardone's Rick sounds like when he is genuinely angry versus performing anger. They know know what Belden's Morty sounds like when he is growing versus when he is regressing. They can write toward those specific qualities, create moments specifically designed to use what these actors do best, in a way that was simply not possible in Season 7 and was only beginning to be possible in Season 8. That is a significant creative resource. It means Season 9 scripts can be more precisely calibrated to the performances than any previous season with these actors. The emotional beats can be more exact. The comedy timing can be more specifically designed. The moments of genuine feeling that the show does better than almost anything else on television can be built with a more complete understanding of how they are going to be delivered. Scott Martyr said Season 9 will convince everyone the show still has a full tank of gas. Steve Levy rated Season 9 at the top of the Harmontown Olive rating scale, the best possible mark. Both of those assessments come from people who worked directly with Cardoni and Belden in the recording booth for Season 9. They heard the performances. They know what the scripts asked for and what the actors delivered. Their confidence in the season is not abstract. It is based on specific knowledge of what these two actors did with the material they were given. Cardoni himself has spoken about the experience of recording Season 9 in terms that match the broader picture of what the season is trying to do. His description of the quality bar going up matches Martyr's full tank language and Levy's top-of-scale rating. Three separate people with direct knowledge of what Season 9 contains are all describing it with the same quality of enthusiasm. Not the forced enthusiasm of promotional obligation, but the specific enthusiasm of people who made something they are genuinely proud of. There is also something worth noting about what it means to be Rick and Morty in the current cultural moment, which is different from what it meant to be Rick and Morty in 2013 or 2017 or even 2022. The show premiered in a specific cultural context and grew into a phenomenon in a different one. The early seasons landed in a moment when the nihilistic surface of the show, the nothing matters energy that Rick performs in almost every episode, resonated with a generation that was drawn to that kind of detached cool. Rick as a symbol, Rick as a philosophy. The Pickle Rick moment in Season 3 was the peak of that phenomenon. The moment when the show's surface reading became a cultural artifact so loud that it almost drowned out what the episode was actually about. The show has spent several seasons since then doing something quiet and steady and patient. It has been dismantling the version of Rick that the surface reading fan base fell in love with. Not destroying it, because the surface is real. Rick is genuinely detached and genuinely capable of cruelty and genuinely performs not caring with enormous skill. But the show has been insisting, season by season, that the surface is not the whole truth, that underneath the performance is a person, that the performance exists because the person is afraid of what happens if he stops performing. Cardoni plays that complexity in a way that is different from Roiland's version. Not better or worse, just different. There is something in Cardoni's Rick that makes the vulnerability slightly more audible underneath the armor. Not louder, not more obvious, but present in a way that the writing can lean on more directly. The Rick that Season 9 inherits, emotionally exposed in a way the character has never quite been before, needing to deal with grief and a failed attempt at connection and a secret he is keeping from his family, is a Rick that Cardoni is particularly well equipped to play. Belden's Morty is similarly positioned. The Morty that Season 9 inherits is someone who is overdue for his own story, his own choices, his own moment of deciding who he is when Rick is not the organizing principle of the answer. Belden plays Morty's growth with a specific kind of quiet determination that makes the growth feel earned rather than sudden. When Season 9 gives Morty the spotlight he has been owed for 2 seasons, Belden will have the accumulated weight of 20 previous episodes behind every choice he makes in those scenes. The show confirmed through Season 12, 10 more episodes coming in Season 9, 10 more after that in Season 10, already in production, Season 11 already being written. The franchise is not going anywhere. Cardoni and Belden are not temporary. They are Rick and Morty for however long the show continues, which by current confirmation means at least through Season 12 and possibly beyond if Levy's belief in a Season 13 turns out to be correct. That permanence changes something about how you watch Season 9. You are not watching a transition anymore. You are watching the show. The version of the show that exists now, with these voices, with this creative team, with these stories, is not a temporary state between what the show was and what it will eventually become. This is what it is. Season 9 is Rick and Morty by the people who are Rick and Morty now, written and performed with the full knowledge of everything that came before and the full confidence of knowing exactly where they are going next. Everything across these 10 sections, the strike, the villain, the stolen life, the emotionally exposed genius, the episode titles, the false reality, the animation change, the sidelined grandson, the expanding universe, and the voices that carry all of it points to a single conclusion. Season 9 of Rick and Morty is not a continuation. It is an arrival. The show has been traveling toward this specific version of itself for 3 seasons, through disruption and loss and reinvention and labor disputes and creative rebuilding. And on May 24th, 2026, at 11 o'clock at night, it gets here. The only thing left to do is watch. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.